pounding on the front door wasn't the random noise of a late-night visitor. It had rhythm, heavy, measured blows that carried intent. Each strike rattled the frames on the hallway wall until one of them hung crooked. The photo of Amy and me at our old house, tilting like the moment itself had lost its balance. I stood there frozen, the echo of that voice still cutting through my chest. "Open the door, Mr. Thompson. Your wife is under arrest."
Just review the facts.
For a few seconds, all I could hear was my pulse. The clock ticked faintly in the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed, but those sounds felt a mile away. I turned toward the entryway, and through the frosted glass, I saw their silhouettes. 3 of them, broad shoulders, rigid posture, uniforms. The porch light glowed behind them, stretching their shadows across the floor like an omen. Oakwood Heights was supposed to be calm at this hour. Kids tucked in, lawns damp with sprinkler mist. Porch lights flicking on one by one in neat suburban order. The kind of neighborhood that pretends trouble doesn't exist. But that voice outside, the one that had just turned my name into a sentence, made this quiet street feel like the opening act of a nightmare. I reached for the knob, my fingers shaking slightly. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe because not opening felt worse. The door swung wide, and there they stood. 3 men, shoulder to shoulder. Uniforms pressed to perfection. Dark navy fabric, brass pins that caught the porch light, pistols already drawn and steady. They didn't look like men asking questions. They looked like men sent to deliver orders. "Step aside, sir. She's coming with us," the one in the middle said. His voice clipped, rehearsed. There was no emotion behind it. It wasn't the voice of a man doing his duty. It was the tone of someone playing a part. My throat went dry. "What's this about?" I managed to ask. "Step aside," he repeated. His sunglasses still on, even though the last light had faded from the sky. That detail stuck in my mind. How the glass reflected nothing but porch light. No eyes, no humanity. Just mirrored voids. Behind me, the sound of steady footsteps echoed from the hallway. Amy had heard everything. I turned to her expecting fear, confusion, something. But she wasn't trembling. She wasn't even surprised. She just looked ready. That calm, deliberate expression she wore when she already understood more than she let on. But before we get to that moment, the night when everything unraveled, let me tell you how it all began. Because this storm didn't come out of nowhere. It had been brewing quietly for months. 3 months earlier, Oakwood Heights had felt like a promise. After years of bouncing between cities, we thought this small, perfectly trimmed neighborhood would finally give us some peace. The air smelled of freshly cut grass, the mailboxes all lined up like soldiers, and the neighbors waved with that polite suburban warmth that almost felt rehearsed. The kind of place where you start believing nothing bad could ever happen. That illusion lasted exactly 1 week. It began with a letter. A neatly folded piece of paper tucked into our mailbox, sealed with a golden HOA emblem. "Your mailbox stands 2 inches above regulation height," it read. "Please correct this within 7 days to maintain community standards." I laughed at first. 2 inches. Who cared? But Amy read it differently. She skimmed it once, folded it carefully, and filed it away in a folder she kept in her desk drawer. She didn't look annoyed, just thoughtful. The letters kept coming. "Your hedges are not uniformly trimmed. The paint shade of your shutters deviates slightly from the approved palette." Then the one that really lit the fuse. A $90 fine for a garden flag Amy had hung near the porch. It was small, patriotic, with an eagle soaring across a red and blue sky. A piece of cloth that, to us, symbolized everything good about the country we'd both served. But apparently, in Oakwood Heights, it disrupted the visual harmony of the community. That phrase became a joke between us for a while. Visual harmony. Amy would chuckle and say, "If only they knew what real disharmony looks like." At first, I thought she was just being witty, but sometimes When she'd read those notices, her jaw would tighten ever so slightly. I started to notice how she kept every letter neatly filed, with little notes scribbled in the margins. Not out of frustration, but documentation. And then there was Barbara, the self-appointed queen of Oakwood Heights, HOA president, clipboard permanently attached to her hand, and a smile that could freeze lava. She'd stroll through the neighborhood like she was inspecting her kingdom. The first time we met her, she introduced herself before she even said hello. Barbara Ellis, HOA president. Like it was a title she'd been knighted with. She had this way of talking that turned even compliments into commands. Lovely lawn. Keep it that way? She lived 2 houses down, always watching, always finding something to critique. And behind the polite tone, there was something sharper. I remember telling Amy one night, "She enjoys this too much." Amy had smiled faintly, eyes on the window. "Power attracts the wrong kind of people when it's too small," she said. I didn't quite get it then. Weeks passed, and the letters turned to warnings, and the warnings to fines. It was harassment, but subtle enough to stay legal, or at least look that way. One evening, I came home to find Barbara standing in our driveway, snapping photos of our garage door. "Documentation," she said curtly. "You violated the color uniformity clause." Amy stood quietly behind me, arms crossed, calm as a lake before a storm. "Barbara," she said finally, "do you really want to keep pushing this?" Barbara gave that same smug smile. "I just enforce the rules, dear." And she walked away, heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks. That was the moment I saw it. The change in Amy. She wasn't angry. She was calculating. Over dinner that night, I asked her what she meant when she told Barbara they were pushing too far. She didn't answer immediately. She simply looked up, her eyes sharp in the kitchen light. "Some people mistake silence for weakness," she said. "It's usually the last mistake they make." That sentence hung between us, heavier than the hum of the refrigerator. I knew Amy had a government job, something serious, but she rarely talked about it. I assumed it was administrative, but there were moments, like when she'd answer calls late at night, speaking in clipped tones, using terms I didn't recognize, that made me wonder if there was more to her work than she let on. Once, when I asked directly, she just smiled. "Need-to-know basis," she said, half joking. I didn't push it. Then came the night of the pounding. The sound of fists against the door jolted me from the couch. It wasn't a knock. It was a declaration. I reached the hallway just as the final thud landed. My hand hesitated over the knob, the metal cool under my palm. "Mr. Thompson," the voice barked again. "Open the door." When I pulled it open, those 3 uniforms filled the porch. Their formation was perfect, too perfect, like they'd practiced it in front of a mirror. The one in front had a sharp jawline, a buzz cut, and a posture that screamed authority. But his hands trembled slightly. "Your wife," he said, "is under arrest." "For what?" I asked, my voice cracking somewhere between disbelief and anger. "Step aside, sir." Before I could say another word, Amy appeared behind me. And that's when everything changed. She wasn't in pajamas or sweats. She was in her uniform, full dress, polished boots, crisp fabric, her hair tied back tight. She looked like she had stepped straight out of an official briefing. The badge on her chest caught the porch light, gleaming like judgment. The men froze. It was subtle, but I saw it. The flicker of hesitation, the instant recalibration of their confidence. They had walked into a house expecting a victim, not an equal. Certainly not someone who outranked them. Amy's voice was calm, deliberate. "Drop your guns." They didn't move. The air thickened between them, every second stretching longer. "I said," Amy repeated, "drop your guns." Her voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. It was command, not request. The one on the left glanced at his leader, uncertain. "Ma'am, we have orders." "No," she cut him off. "You have costumes. You have costumes." That's when Barbara appeared on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, wrapped in her favorite pink cardigan, that same smug grin plastered across her face. "There she is," she called out, triumphant. "Take her!" Amy didn't even look at her. Her eyes stayed on the men with the pistols. "You know what happens if you refuse a direct order from a federal officer, right?" The leader blinked, his jaw tightening. "Federal?" "Check the seal," Amy said, tapping her badge. "You're impersonating officers on federal property now." Silence. The kind of silence that hums in your bones. Then, slowly, the man on the right lowered his weapon, set it gently on the porch rail. The second followed, his hands lifting slightly. The leader stood frozen for one more heartbeat before he finally let the gun clatter to the floorboards. I didn't know exactly who my wife really was in that moment, but watching those men surrender, I realized she wasn't someone to be crossed. Not by them, not by Barbara, not by anyone. And as the porch light glinted off those fallen weapons, Barbara's smug expression finally cracked, the first hairline fracture in her illusion of control. She had no idea that tonight was only the beginning of her fall. The air on that porch was like static, thick, electric, and ready to explode. 3 pistols lay on the wooden floorboards, their metal still warm under the porch light. The men who had come to take Amy now stood stiff, uncertain, stripped of the illusion they'd worn so confidently a few minutes ago. Behind them, Barbara's voice sliced through the night. "What are you doing? Arrest her! She's the one breaking rules here!" Her tone cracked, sharp with disbelief and desperation, like someone watching their little empire collapse. Amy turned to her slowly, not angry, not smug, just calm in that way only people who truly understand power can be. "Barbara," she said, "you just made the worst mistake of your life." The 3 fake officers shifted uneasily, glancing between Amy and Barbara, realizing their plan was falling apart. One of them muttered, She's ranking, isn't she?" Amy stepped closer, her boots steady, her voice even sharper now. "Not just ranking, outranking, and you know exactly what that means." The leader swallowed hard, his jaw tight, trying to salvage authority that had long since vanished. I stood behind Amy, heart pounding, watching this bizarre, terrifying, and somehow poetic showdown unfold. The woman I'd shared breakfast with that morning, quiet, smiling Amy, now stood like a commander in the middle of a battlefield. Everything about her posture said control. "Badges," Amy ordered. They hesitated, but she didn't blink. Now. One by one, they unclipped the fake badges from their chests and dropped them at her feet. The little bits of metal hit the wood with a dull clink, each one sounding like the truth landing harder than the last. I knelt down and picked one up. It was plastic, smooth, light, and obviously fake. They hadn't even bothered to engrave a real seal. It was intimidation by costume, nothing more. Barbara's face twisted in panic. "You can't do this!" she shrieked. "You can't order them around. They're officers!" Amy looked her dead in the eye. "No, Barbara. They're criminals, and you're the one who sent them." That hit her like a slap. For a moment, Barbara froze, mouth half open. The porch light flickered, casting her shadow long across the street. Neighbors had started to gather by then, porch lights clicking on up and down the block, blinds parting, phones raised. The quiet cul-de-sac that once smelled like garden mulch and barbecues now buzzed with murmurs and whispers. The illusion of Oakwood Heights, its neat lawns, perfect order, and quiet dominance, was unraveling under the weight of real law. Amy pulled her phone from her pocket and made one calm call. "This is Agent Thompson. I'm at 214 Maple Drive. We've got 3 armed impersonators and 1 civilian instigator on site. Send Sheriff Daniels." "Yes, immediately." Barbara's face drained of color. "Agent?" she stammered. "You're not. You can't be." Amy didn't answer. She just turned away, holstering the sidearm she'd kept hidden under her jacket. For the first time since I'd known her, She looked every inch the woman she'd tried to hide from this small, quiet neighborhood. Her uniform wasn't decoration. It was authority stitched with earned weight. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens began to echo through Oakwood Heights. Red and blue lights flashed off mailboxes, turning the perfect lawns into a crime scene. The real officers pulled up fast. 3 cruisers, lights spinning, tires crunching against the gravel. The neighbors drew back but didn't leave. No one wanted to miss the sight of their almighty HOA president standing center stage in her own scandal. Sheriff Daniels stepped out of the lead car, his hand resting on his holster. A big man with a slow walk and a reputation for not missing much. His eyes flicked from Amy to the 3 imposters lined up at the edge of the porch, hands raised. Then to Barbara, who stood trembling with fury. "What do we have here?" he asked, his tone even but edged with disbelief. Amy nodded toward the men. "Impersonating officers. Armed. Attempted unlawful arrest. Ordered by this woman?" The sheriff's expression hardened. He looked at Barbara. "Is that true?" Barbara straightened, forcing her voice into the calm tone she used at HOA meetings. "These men are security contractors. I was simply ensuring compliance with community regulations." Daniels blinked, once, slowly. "You sent armed men to someone's house over HOA violations?" She hesitated. "I was within my rights as president." The sheriff turned to his deputies, his face unreadable. "Cuff them!" "What?" Barbara gasped as 2 officers moved forward. "You can't do that! I run this community." One of the deputies tightened the cuffs around her wrists. "Not anymore, ma'am." As they led the 3 fake cops away, Barbara struggled, her voice echoing down the street. "She refused to pay her fine. She disrespected authority. She... The sheriff raised a hand, silencing her. "You've just admitted conspiracy to impersonate law enforcement. That's federal. You're going with them." Laughter rippled from the neighbors who'd gathered on their porches. Phones were still recording. The sight of Barbara Ellis, the woman who'd fined people for chipped paint, being loaded into the back of a cruiser was a moment no one wanted to forget. Amy didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just stood quietly, watching. When Barbara turned toward her, eyes wild, Amy finally spoke. "You could have just left us alone, Barbara. But you couldn't help yourself." Barbara tried to speak, but the cruiser door shut, swallowing her words. The flashing lights faded slowly as the cars pulled away, leaving only the quiet hum of night again. The sheriff stayed behind a moment, nodding at Amy. "Heard of you before," he said with a faint grin. "Didn't expect to see you in Oakwood Heights of all places." Amy returned the nod, professional but warm. "Didn't expect to have to pull rank in my own driveway." Daniels chuckled, glancing toward me. "You've got quite the wife there, Mr. Thompson." "Yeah," I said, exhaling for the first time in what felt like hours. "I'm starting to realize that." When the cruisers finally rolled away, and the neighbors began retreating into their homes, I turned to Amy. The street was calm again, but it was a different kind of calm. She gave a small, knowing smile. Long enough. It took days for the story to ripple through the neighborhood. The local news showed up the next morning, cameras rolling, narrating the fall of Oakwood Heights HOA president like it was a prime-time scandal. Suburban HOA president arrested for conspiracy and impersonation of officers, the anchor said, her voice half shocked, half amused. The footage of Barbara being led away in cuffs replayed on every local channel. The HOA meeting a week later was the quietest I'd ever seen. The long table at the front, once crowded with smug faces and clipboards, now sat half empty. The few remaining board members shuffled papers, avoiding eye contact. No speeches, no threats about mailbox sizes or hedge heights, just silence and the occasional throat clear. Amy attended in civilian clothes. No uniform, no badge. She didn't go there to brag. She went because she still believed in rules. Real ones. When she stood to speak, the room fell silent. "Rules exist to protect people," she said calmly, "not to control them." Somewhere along the way, that line got blurred here. I hope after what happened, everyone remembers the difference. The few neighbors who'd once avoided us now came up afterward to thank her. One elderly couple said Barbara had threatened them with foreclosure over weeds. Another confessed they'd been fined hundreds of dollars for painting their fence a shade too light. They all said the same thing. They'd been afraid to speak up. Until now. That evening, after the meeting, we sat on the porch. The air smelled like cut grass again, the sprinklers hissed, and the neighborhood finally felt normal. Not fake normal, real normal. Peaceful, because it had been earned. Amy leaned back in her chair, sipping her tea. The cicadas hummed softly in the trees, filling the quiet. "You know," I said, watching the sun sink beyond the rooftops, "Barbara picked the wrong fight." Amy smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the last orange sliver of daylight. "No," she said, "she picked the wrong woman." For a long moment we just sat there, the night calm around us. And though Oakwood Heights looked the same houses, same lawns, same fences, it felt different. The kind of different that happens when fear gets replaced by truth. Barbara's clipboard was gone. The ridiculous fines stopped coming. The neighbors started talking to one another again. And Amy, she went back to work like nothing had happened. No interviews, no attention, just quiet strength. But every so often, when I'd walk past her office and see that crisp uniform hanging neatly by the door, I'd remember that night. The pounding, the guns, the silence, and the moment the balance of power shifted forever. Oakwood Heights would never forget it either. Because the night they tried to arrest my wife, the neighborhood learned that authority isn't worn. It's earned. And as for Amy, she never needed to prove it again.